Naruto's transformation begins when he finds the ancient scroll imbued with the essence of the Ito no Me. Awakening these powers in a moment of despair, he becomes intoxicated by his newfound ability to manipulate the invisible strings of fate itself. This marks the beginning of his path to domination. The Hidden Leaf Village, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight, seemed peaceful at first glance. But beneath its tranquil exterior, chaos brewed, the kind only one boy could orchestrate. Naruto Uzumaki, long dismissed as a nuisance and a pariah, had discovered a power that would change his destiny. No longer would he seek their approval, he would force it. Naruto hunched over a makeshift workbench in the damp recesses of an abandoned storeroom he had claimed as his secret hideout. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Scattered around him were various objects he had experimented on, small rodents, broken kunai, and a few pilfered puppets from the academy training hall. In his hands, thin, glowing threads of chakra extended from his fingertips. They shimmered like ghostly strings in the dim light, attaching themselves to a limp squirrel on the table. With a flick of his fingers, the creature sprang to life, moving jerkily as if it were a marionette. Naruto grinned. "You'll all see soon enough." Nobody pushes Naruto Uzumaki around anymore. The parasite strings were his ticket to power. At first, he had struggled to maintain control, the thread snapping under strain. But weeks of relentless practice in secrecy had paid off. Now, he could not only control small animals but even manipulate the weak-willed among the villagers. He intended to push those limits further tonight. Naruto's first targets were inconspicuous, a few stray cats and dogs. The animals became his eyes and ears, infiltrating homes and businesses. Using his strings, he sowed minor chaos, toppling market stalls, scattering goods, and leading livestock astray. The villagers grew tense, whispers of bad luck and mischief spreading through the streets. Naruto observed from the shadows, reveling in their confusion. "Just wait," he muttered, perched atop a rooftop. "This is only the beginning." The academy was bustling the next morning, students chattering as Iriko Minno prepared to start the day's lessons. Naruto arrived late, as usual, drawing the usual groans and dismissive looks from his peers. But today, he didn't care. Today, he had a plan. Hiding behind the building, Naruto focused his chakra, extending his parasite strings toward the classroom. The thin thread slipped through the cracks in the walls, reaching Irika, who was writing on the chalkboard. The moment they latched onto him, Naruto felt the familiar tug of control. He grinned wickedly. Irika froze mid-sentence, his eyes glazing over for a brief moment before he turned to face the class. "Everyone, listen up," he declared, his voice unusually enthusiastic. "I have an announcement to make." The students quieted, sensing something was off. Irika's smile was unnaturally wide as he gestured toward the doorway. "Naruto Uzumaki is the most talented and promising student I have ever taught. His skills far surpass anyone else in this class." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Naruto stepped inside, arms crossed and a smug expression plastered on his face. "Well, Irika-sensei, I'm glad you finally realized it." Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. "What's going on here?" Sakura's voice rang out. "This has to be some kind of joke." Irika continued, oblivious to the growing unrest. "Naruto's hard work and dedication make him a role model for all of you. You should strive to be more like him." Naruto basked in the shocked expressions of his classmates, savoring their discomfort. But the moment was short-lived. Irika's body trembled as he began to resist the strains. "Naruto," Irika growled, his voice strained. "What are you doing?" The string snapped as Irika broke free, clutching his head. The realization of what had happened dawned on him, his eyes narrowing in anger. "Naruto. Outside, now." Naruto smirked but complied, walking out with an exaggerated swagger. Behind him, The classroom erupted in whispers. The confrontation was swift. Iruka scolded Naruto in the courtyard, his voice rising in frustration. "What were you thinking? Using a technique like that to humiliate me in front of the class? This isn't a joke, Naruto." Naruto's eyes hardened, his playful demeanor vanishing. "You don't get it, do you? I'm done playing by your rules. You're all going to respect me, one way or another." Iruka's expression softened, but before he could respond, Naruto turned on his heel and walked away. Iruka watched him go, unease gnawing at him. Something about Naruto had changed, and it wasn't for the better. Word of Naruto's stunt spread quickly through the village. By evening, a small mob had gathered outside his apartment, demanding answers. They were angry, fed up with the boy's antics. When Naruto appeared at the window, they hurled insults and threats, some even throwing rocks. Naruto stared down at them, unflinching. His parasite strings emerged once more, latching onto several of the villagers. They froze, their movements jerky as Naruto forced them to turn on their companions, shoving and shouting accusations. The mob descended into chaos, confusion, and fear overtaking their anger. But Naruto wasn't done. With a snap of his fingers, the strings released, and he leapt from the window, landing in the middle of the crowd. His hands formed seals, and a wave of intense heat radiated from his body. "Overheat," he yelled, slamming his palm onto the ground. Flames erupted in a searing arc, engulfing the street. Villagers screamed and scattered as fire consumed everything in its path. When the smoke cleared, the once bustling street was reduced to charred remnants, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning wood and ash. Naruto stood amidst the destruction, his expression cold and unyielding. "That's your warning," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Next time, I won't hold back." As the villagers fled in terror, Naruto turned and walked away, the flames reflecting in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful, unstoppable. And he was just getting started. Naruto stood in his hideout, his fingers weaving intricate patterns of glowing parasite strings. Each thread danced with ominous energy, connected to scrolls and maps of Konohas sprawled across the table. His eyes were cold, calculating, a far cry from the naive boy he once was. "Danzo," he muttered, his voice laced with venom. "You've ruled from the shadows long enough. Let's see how you like being my puppet." Naruto's transformation was not just in power but in appearance. He had crafted a new identity, one that instilled fear. A dark cloak, stitched with crimson strings, flowed around him like a living entity. The cloak's design mimicked the form of a demon, the strings shifting and writhing as though alive. This was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, this was the puppet master of Konoha. Danzo Shimura sat in his dimly lit office, flanked by Root Umbu. His scheming mind worked tirelessly, plotting his next move to seize control of Konoha. But tonight, the hunter would become the hunted. Naruto had already infiltrated the compound. His parasite strings extended from the shadows, slithering through cracks and crevices until they found their targets. The strings latched onto the Root Umbu guarding Danzo, and with a subtle twitch of his fingers, Naruto seized control. The guard stiffened before turning to face Danzo, weapons drawn. The old Warhawk's single visible eye widened in surprise. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, rising to his feet. From the darkness, Naruto stepped forward, his demonic cloak trailing behind him. The crimson strings glowed ominously, casting eerie patterns on the walls. "The meaning, Danzo?" Naruto's voice was cold and mocking. "It means your reign of shadows ends tonight." Danzo's expression twisted with anger and fear. "You dare challenge me, boy? You're nothing but a..." Silence. Naruto flicked his fingers, and the strings controlling the Umbu forced them to pin Danzo against the wall. The old man struggled, but the strings tightened, cutting off his movements. Naruto stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Do you feel it, Danzo? The loss of control? The helplessness? That's what you've done to this village for years. Danzo's mind raced. You think killing me will solve anything? The village needs strong leaders. Strong leaders don't hide in the dark, Naruto snapped. They don't sacrifice lives for their ambitions. With a sharp motion, Naruto's strings yanked Danzo forward, forcing him to kneel. Naruto crouched, meeting the elder's eye. You're going to confess, Danzo. Every lie, every crime, every betrayal. And then, you'll serve as an example. The next morning, the villagers gathered in the Hokage square, drawn by the sudden summons. On the platform stood Danzo, his body rigid, his face pale. Naruto, cloaked in his demonic guise, stood behind him, controlling the scene with invisible threads. Danzo's voice echoed across the square, trembling as he recounted his misdeeds. I ordered the massacre of the Uchiha clan. I orchestrated assassinations to consolidate power. I exploited Root for my own gain. Gasps and cries of outrage rippled through the crowd. The villagers stared in horror, disbelief, and growing fury. Danzo's image as a shadowy protector of Konoha was shattered. When the confession ended, Naruto released the strings, letting Danzo collapse to the ground. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the uproar like a blade. Your leaders have failed you, Naruto declared, his tone commanding and merciless. They've used you, lied to you, and left you vulnerable. But no more. The Age of Shadows ends with me, your new god. The villagers recoiled at his words, fear and uncertainty written on their faces. But no one dared to challenge him. Naruto's reign of terror didn't stop with Danzo. Over the following weeks, he targeted the remaining council members, exposing their corruption in the same manner. Homura Midokado and Kohara Yododen found themselves confessing their roles in suppressing reforms and hoarding resources. Each confession was followed by swift and brutal retribution. Naruto's power continued to grow. The crimson strings of his cloak now extended farther, their grip stronger. He used his abilities to infiltrate every corner of Konoha, turning the village's own systems against itself. The final confrontation came in the depths of Root's headquarters. Danzo, despite his public disgrace, had retreated to his underground lair, gathering his loyalists for a desperate last stand. Naruto, however, was prepared. The battle was swift and one-sided. Naruto's string sliced through the air, binding Root agents and turning them against one another. He moved with calculated precision, his cloak's tendrils whipping and lashing like living weapons. Danzo, cornered and defiant, activated the seal on his arm, revealing the stolen cherry non-eyes. I will not fall to you, demon, he roared, unleashing a torrent of wind-based jutsu. Naruto's strings intercepted the attacks, absorbing and redirecting the energy. He advanced steadily, his expression unreadable. You're out of tricks, old man, Naruto said, his voice devoid of emotion. With a final burst of chakra, Naruto's strings pierced Danzo's chest, lifting him into the air. The elder gasped, blood dripping from his lips as the strings twisted tighter. Naruto addressed the remaining Root Umbu, his voice echoing in the chamber. Witness the end of your leader. You served him out of fear, but fear will no longer rule this village. He turned back to Danzo, his gaze cold and unforgiving. This is for every life you destroyed, every lie you told. With a sharp motion, he severed the strings, letting Danzo's lifeless body fall to the ground. The Root Umbu knelt, their loyalty broken. Naruto stepped forward, his crimson cloak flowing like liquid flame. You have two choices, he said, his voice like steel. Follow me, or face the same fate as your master. One by one, they bowed, their heads touching the ground. Naruto surveyed the scene, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. Konoha was his now, its old order dismantled. The Age of Shadows had ended, and a new era had begun. Ichinen exams arena buzzed with excitement, the stands filled with villagers and shinobi alike. It was the highlight of the year, a spectacle that showcased the next generation of ninja. Yet, amidst the cheers and laughter, a dark storm brewed in the shadows, one that would forever change the course of Konoha. Naruto Uzumaki stood in the contestants' waiting area, his eyes fixed on the arena. The sunlight streaming through the gaps in the stands gleamed against his new cloak. The crimson strings that adorned the black fabric seemed alive, writhing faintly with suppressed energy. Beneath the cloak, his body radiated a terrifying calm. This was not the loud, attention-seeking boy the villagers remembered. This was the Puppet King, ready to unveil his dominion. The first match of the finals had just concluded, and the crowd roared in approval as the proctor prepared to call the next participants. Next match, Naruto Uzumaki vs Neji Hyuga. The murmurs began immediately. Naruto, the underdog, had been a source of ridicule for years. How could he hope to stand against a prodigy like Neji? Little did they know, this would be no ordinary match. Naruto stepped into the arena, his movements deliberate and measured. Neji followed, his Byakugan already active, scanning his opponent for any weaknesses. The proctor glanced between them and raised his hand. Begin. Neji wasted no time. He darted forward, his fingers poised to strike Naruto's chakra points. But before he could land a blow, strings shot out from beneath Naruto's cloak, intercepting him mid-strike. The threads coiled around Neji's wrists, halting his movements. The crowd gasped as Naruto's strings lifted Neji into the air, suspending him like a puppet. The Hyuga prodigy struggled, his Byakugan flaring, but the strings only tightened in response. What is this? Neji spat, his voice strained. Naruto smirked. Your fate, Neji. Isn't that what you like to talk about? That people can't escape their destiny? Let me show you what it's like to have no control. With a flick of his fingers, Naruto's strings hurled Neji across the arena. The Hyuga crashed into the ground, dazed but conscious. He scrambled to his feet, launching a rotation defense to block the incoming strings. For a moment, it seemed like he had gained the upper hand. Then Naruto activated his observation haki. The crowd couldn't see the subtle shift, but Neji froze as he felt it. Naruto's presence became oppressive, as if an invisible force was bearing down on him. Every move he tried to make was predicted, every attack preempted. Naruto dodged effortlessly, weaving through Neji's strikes like a ghost. Is that all the Hyuga clan has to offer? Naruto taunted. His voice carried across the arena, sharp and mocking. Neji's frustration boiled over. He charged forward, pouring everything into one final strike. But Naruto's strings moved faster. They ensnared Neji completely, binding him in a cocoon of glowing threads. With a sharp pull, Naruto slammed him into the ground, knocking him unconscious. The proctor hesitated before raising his hand. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. The arena fell silent, the spectators too stunned to react. Naruto stood in the center, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. Then he raised his hand, and with a dramatic flourish, he activated the birdcage. Crimson strings erupted from Naruto's cloak, spreading outward in all directions. They pierced the ground, walls, and ceiling of the stadium, forming an intricate web that enclosed the entire arena. The strings shimmered with an otherworldly glow, creating a barrier that no one could escape. Panic erupted in the stands as villagers and shinobi alike realized they were trapped. The proctor and the other contestants rushed to the edges of the cage, trying to find a way out, but the strings repelled every attempt to break through. Attention, Konoha. Naruto's voice boomed, amplified by his chakra. He stood at the center of the arena, his cloak bellowing as the strings around him pulsed with energy. For years, you've ridiculed me, ignored me, treated me like dirt. But today, I'll show you the truth. This village is nothing but a cage, and you've all been its prisoners. The crowd's panic turned to confusion and fear as they listened to his words. Among them, Sasuke Uchiha narrowed his eyes, his Sharingan spinning as he analyzed Naruto's movements. "Naruto!" Sasuke shouted, leaping into the arena. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Naruto turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Ah, Sasuke. The prodigal Uchiha. Tell me, how does it feel to be a pawn in this village's game?" Sasuke activated his Sharingan fully, the Tomo spinning faster. "You've lost your mind. If you think I'll let you get away with this, you're dead wrong." Naruto chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Then come, Sasuke. Show me the power of the Uchiha." The two clashed in a blur of motion, Sasuke's Sharingan tracking Naruto's movements while Naruto's observation haki anticipated Sasuke's attacks. The arena shook with the force of their battle, the ground cracking beneath their feet. Sasuke unleashed a barrage of fireballs, but Naruto's strings intercepted them, dispersing the flames. He retaliated with a series of precise strikes, his strings slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. Sasuke dodged narrowly, countering with a Chidori that crackled with electricity. "Is that all?" Naruto taunted as he sidestepped the attack effortlessly. "Your Sharingan is useless against me. I see everything before it happens." Sasuke gritted his teeth, his frustration mounting. He pushed his Sharingan to its limits, but no matter how hard he tried, Naruto remained untouchable. Finally, Naruto decided to end the fight. With a wave of his hand, his strings enveloped Sasuke, binding him in place. The Uchiha struggled, his chakra flaring, but the strings held firm. "You're strong, Sasuke," Naruto said, his voice almost regretful. "But strength alone isn't enough. This village has blinded you, just as it blinded me. But now, I see clearly." Naruto turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "You fools built this cage around me. Now it's mine to control. From this day forward, Konoha answers to me." The crowd's fear turned to shock as they realized the truth. Naruto wasn't just declaring his strength, he was claiming the village itself. And as the birdcage tightened around him, they understood there was no escape from the Puppet King. The sun had long set over Konoha, the village now bathed in the red glow of the rising blood moon. The pale light cast long shadows across the streets, where the usual lively bustle of the Hidden Leaf had been replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. The air was thick with the sense of unease, the weight of the villagers' fear palpable in every breath. Naruto Uzumaki, once the playful and naive boy seeking acknowledgement, had transformed into something far darker, something unrecognizable to those who had known him. Konoha was now his domain, his empire. The Hokage Tower, once a symbol of leadership and unity, now stood as a monument to his power. The streets, once filled with the sounds of laughter and everyday life, now echoed with the footsteps of his enforcers, the string puppets. Naruto had brought his vision to life, a vision where he was no longer the outcast, but the ruler of all. His control was absolute, and those who dared defy him were swiftly eradicated. He had begun using his overheat strings with increasing frequency, drawing blood in the most public, dramatic ways. The executions were his art, the villagers his audience. Tonight, the people of Konoha gathered once more, not out of choice but because they had no choice. The square at the center of the village had been cleared, and in the center stood Naruto, flanked by his elite squad of string puppets. Among them were figures like Sakura Haruno, her eyes void of emotion, Sai, his usual smile replaced by an unsettling blank stare, and several former Umbu captains whose loyalty had been bought through the promise of power. They stood like lifeless dolls, manipulated by Naruto's will. Naruto's gaze swept over the crowd, his eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and disdain. His fingers twitched slightly, and the familiar crimson glow of his strings shimmered in the air. The tension in the crowd thickened, the murmurs growing louder, but a single glance from Naruto silenced them. He stood tall, no longer the boy who once sought attention, but a god who had seized his throne through blood and sacrifice. The target of the night's display was Hayashi Hyuga, the patriarch of the esteemed Hyuga clan. The Hyugas, long seen as the noble, untouchable family of Konoha, had remained neutral during Naruto's rise. They had believed that their ancient bloodline would shield them from the new regime. They had been wrong. Hayashi, dressed in his ceremonial robes, was dragged forward by a pair of puppets, his hands bound tightly behind his back. His eyes, the iconic Byakugan activated, scanned the surroundings with a mix of defiance and trepidation. He knew what this was. Naruto was not only demanding submission from him, he was making a statement. Naruto stepped forward, his expression calm, almost detached, but his presence was overwhelming. The blood moon overhead seemed to hang heavy with anticipation, as if the heavens themselves were watching. The village held its breath. "I've always wondered, Hayashi," Naruto's voice cut through the silence, smooth yet laced with an unsettling coldness. "What makes your clan so special? You've always looked down on those who weren't born with your precious bloodline. Your arrogance, your disdain for those you deemed inferior, it was never something I could understand." Hayashi lifted his chin, his pride still burning despite the chains that bound him. "You are nothing but a child, Naruto. You've taken power through fear, not strength. You will never command respect from those who have earned it?" Naruto's eyes flickered with a trace of annoyance, but his smile remained, calculating and dangerous. "Respect? Huh?" He lifted a hand, and a series of overheat strings shot out from his fingers, wrapping around Hayashi's arms and neck. The force was so precise, so controlled, that it left the elder Hyuga helpless, unable to move. "I don't need respect," Naruto murmured. "I need obedience." With a flick of his wrist, Naruto twisted the strings. Hayashi gasped in pain as the strings constricted around his neck, cutting off his air supply. His Byakugan flickered, struggling against the pressure. "You're in no position to lecture me," Naruto continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You were too blind to see the writing on the wall. The village was never yours to protect. It was mine to claim." The villagers watched in a stunned silence, their eyes wide with fear. They had seen what Naruto could do to those who defied him. His previous executions had been gruesome displays of power, but this felt different. This was Hayashi Hyuga, a man whose bloodline had been revered for generations, and yet he was being humiliated, brought low by a boy who had once been beneath their notice. Naruto's face darkened as he drew the strings tighter. Hayashi's body trembled, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "You should be grateful," Naruto continued. "This is the last act of mercy you'll ever receive." With another twist of his wrist, Naruto sent a surge of chakra through the strings. Hayashi's eyes widened in shock as his body began to lift off the ground, his legs dangling in the air as if he were a marionette. The villagers gasped, but Naruto silenced them with a cold stare. "Look at him," Naruto said, addressing the crowd. "The great Hayashi Hyuga, reduced to nothing more than a puppet. A puppet controlled by my will." He flicked his fingers, sending Hayashi crashing to the ground. The elder's body hit the earth with a sickening thud, his once pristine robes now dirted and torn. The crowd stirred in discomfort, but Naruto was far from done. He took a step toward Hayashi, looming over him like a predator. "Now," he said softly, his voice low and dangerous, "you will do something for me." Hayashi, his face pale and bloodied, looked up with defiance in his eyes, but Naruto's next words shattered that. "Bow before me." The command was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 threats. Hayashi's pride fought against the overwhelming force of Naruto's presence, but in the end, his body betrayed him. With a groan of pain, he lowered his head, his forehead touching the cold, unforgiving ground. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the leader of one of Konoha's most powerful clans was forced to bow to the very person they had once considered beneath them. The Hyuga clan, revered for its bloodline and ancient traditions, had been broken in a single moment. And it wasn't just Hayashi who was broken, so was the illusion of their invincibility. Naruto's smile grew wider, more sinister. Good. You learn quickly, Hayashi. Now, let me make one thing clear. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. Hinata, your daughter, will be mine. She is to be my queen. The Hyuga clan will serve me. You will serve me. And anyone who dares defy me will meet the same fate as you. Hayashi's face twisted in fury and humiliation, but he knew better than to speak. The moment he had bowed, he had lost. And with that loss came a fate far worse than death: his family, his legacy, reduced to nothing more than instruments of Naruto's will. Naruto straightened up, the strings retracting from Hayashi's body. He cast a glance at the crowd, who were now visibly trembling. They had seen what he was capable of, and the fear was real. It was no longer just a matter of political power, it was about control. Absolute control. You all have seen it, Naruto said, his voice booming across the square. This is what happens to those who defy me. This is the price of rebellion. Understand this, Konoha, your village is mine. And the Hyuga clan is mine. Your precious noble families. Mine. You are all mine. He turned to his string puppets, signaling them with a subtle movement. Without a word, they began to drag Hayashi away, his body limp and broken. The villagers watched in silence as the puppet strings snapped tight, their leader now nothing more than a tool of Naruto's will. The blood moon hung high above the village, casting its eerie light on the scene below. Konoha had been subdued, but the cost had been high. The fear was tangible, and in that fear, Naruto saw only one thing: complete and utter submission. The village was his, and it would remain his for as long as he willed it. And as for Hayashi Hyuga, he was but the first to fall before the new order of Konoha, a symbol of what was to come. Those who resisted would be crushed. Those who bowed would be rewarded. And all who looked to Naruto as their ruler would find their place at his feet. The blood moon had risen. And with it, Naruto's reign had begun. The Land of Fire had long been the dominant power in the shinobi world, but it had always been reliant on the strength of its hidden village and the daimyo's authority to maintain its vast expanse. Konoha, once a symbol of the will of fire, had now fallen under the iron fist of Naruto Uzumaki. The village had been reshaped in his image, molded into a place of submission and fear. But for Naruto, the conquest of Konoha was only the beginning. The true challenge lay in expanding his empire, in reaching out to the other hidden villages and bringing the entire Land of Fire under his control. With Konoha firmly under his thumb, Naruto turned his attention to the neighboring villages, his ambition swelling beyond his wildest dreams. He was no longer content with ruling from the shadows, he would control everything: the entire Land of Fire, the various feudal lords, the hidden villages, and every shinobi who lived under their power. No one would be spared. The world would bow before him. Naruto's strategy was deceptively simple, yet utterly effective. He would infiltrate, destabilize, and destroy from within. Using his growing mastery of the overheat strings, parasite control, and an army of clones, he would slowly dismantle the hidden villages one by one. The power of his manipulation grew stronger with every passing day, his reach ever expanding as his forces infiltrated every corner of the Land of Fire. To those who had once seen Naruto as nothing more than an outcast, his rise was unfathomable. But now, with the full extent of his power, his goal was clear: he would crush the old order and replace it with his own. The strength of the shinobi world, the power of the daimyo, would be reduced to mere tools to further his will. No one was safe from his reach. Naruto's first target was the Land of Fire's daimyo. The feudal lord had long held sway over the vast nation, but he had always been little more than a puppet, controlled by the strength of the hidden villages. The daimyo's position had always been a matter of formality, with the true power resting in the hands of the Hokage and the shinobi who served him. But now, with Naruto in control of Konoha, the daimyo's position was in jeopardy. Using his enhanced clones, Naruto sent infiltrators into the heart of the Land of Fire's government. The clones, each equipped with his strings and parasite control abilities, took on the roles of trusted officials and advisors, all while working to destabilize the power structure from within. They manipulated the daimyo's closest allies, sowing distrust and division among them. The feudal lord, already weak and ineffective, was caught in a web of lies, suspicion, and manipulation. Within weeks, the daimyo was on the verge of a breakdown. His court, once a place of stability and order, was now riddled with intrigue and paranoia. One by one, his trusted aides began to disappear, only to be replaced by Naruto's clones, who quietly twisted the knife deeper into the nation's power structure. The daimyo was made to believe that his closest allies were conspiring against him, and soon, his sense of control began to crumble. Naruto had already anticipated this, and he began to make his move. His strings, now extending far beyond Konoha, tangled with the Land of Fire's political apparatus. The daimyo's confidence was shattered, and his rule quickly became untenable. Desperate, he was forced to abdicate, leaving his title and lands behind. Naruto, without a single direct confrontation, had secured control over the Land of Fire's feudal leadership. The old regime had crumbled, and with it, any remaining hope of resistance. However, as much as Naruto had secured the daimyo's downfall, he knew that true power still resided in the strength of the shinobi, especially those like Might Guy, who embodied the ideals of hard work and determination. Guy, a symbol of the shinobi who valued perseverance and personal growth above all else, would be a significant obstacle to his vision. Though Naruto had already crushed many who opposed him, Guy represented something more, a living embodiment of the shinobi way that Naruto had long since rejected. If Naruto was to be truly untouchable, if he was to completely reshape the world in his image, he would need to deal with Guy. Naruto's plan was simple: he would provoke Guy into a battle. Guy was known for his unwavering spirit, his determination to fight against overwhelming odds. And Naruto, with his infinite power, would test the very limits of that spirit. It didn't take long for Naruto to find Guy. The man had been traveling across the Land of Fire, gathering information, and attempting to rally those who still clung to the old ideals of justice and hard work. Guy, with his eternal optimism, had become one of the most vocal figures standing against Naruto's reign. But in Naruto's eyes, Guy was nothing more than a relic of a broken past, someone who needed to be eliminated if Naruto's vision was to be realized. Their encounter took place on a quiet, desolate field, far from the prying eyes of the civilians. The moon hung high above them, casting a red glow across the barren landscape. Guy stood firm, his body tense, ready for the fight of his life. His green jumpsuit flapped in the wind as he prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation. He knew that Naruto had become a force to be reckoned with, but he also knew that he couldn't allow the future to be shaped by someone like Naruto. "Naruto," Guy called out, his voice full of conviction, "I won't allow you to destroy everything we fought for. The ideals of hard work, the strength we build through perseverance, it's all worth fighting for." Naruto regarded Guy with a cold, indifferent gaze. "Hard work is a fool's dream, Guy. You think you can fight your way to the top with sweat and determination? The world doesn't bend to effort. It bends to power." He smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. "And right now, I have more power than you could ever comprehend." Guy's expression hardened. "You may have power, Naruto, but you will never break the spirit of those who believe in the ideals of hard work and dedication. It's because of those ideals that we fight, and that's what will keep me standing against you." With that, Guy exploded into action, his body moving faster than Naruto had anticipated. Guy opened the gates, unleashing the full power of the 8 gates. His body surged with chakra, and his muscles rippled with newfound strength. In an instant, Guy closed the distance between them, delivering a series of rapid punches that shattered the ground beneath them. Naruto, however, simply stood there, unfazed, watching Guy's movements with a detached curiosity. Guy attacked relentlessly, his fists pounding the air with the force of a thunderclap. The power of the eighth gate surged through him, amplifying his already incredible strength to an almost godlike level. His speed was unmatched, and his strikes were devastating. But despite the intensity of his assault, Naruto didn't move. His eyes glowed with cold, unwavering resolve. As Guy launched his final, most powerful attack, an assault designed to break even the hardest of defenses, Naruto finally made his move. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed armament haki, coating his body in a layer of invisible, intangible force. Guy's punch collided with Naruto's chest, but instead of feeling the impact of the blow, Guy was met with a force that shattered his very bones. The power of haki resonated through the air, and Guy was sent sprawling to the ground, his body unable to withstand the crushing force. Naruto stood tall, unscathed, as Guy struggled to rise. "You're pathetic, Guy," Naruto mocked, his voice cold and cruel. "Hard work is nothing but a fantasy. Only power bends the world to your will. And I have the power to crush anyone who stands in my way." Guy, bloodied and broken, looked up at Naruto with defiance in his eyes. Despite the pain, despite the overwhelming odds, he refused to bow. "I may be beaten, Naruto, but I'll never stop believing in the power of hard work. It's the reason I fight." Naruto smirked. "Then you'll die a fool's death." With a single, fluid motion, Naruto raised his hand, and Guy's body was lifted into the air, suspended by Naruto's overheat strings. The world around them seemed to grow quiet as Guy struggled to free himself, his body racked with pain. But there was no escape. Naruto's power was absolute. "I've conquered the land of fire," Naruto said, his voice cold and final. "And now, I've crushed its last hope." He flicked his wrist, and Guy's body was sent crashing to the ground, lifeless. As Naruto turned away from the battlefield, the blood moon overhead cast its eerie glow upon him. His conquest of the land of fire was complete. The daimyo had been toppled, the hidden villages had been infiltrated, and the last remnants of resistance had been destroyed. There was no one left to challenge his rule. The shinobi world had been reshaped in his image, and with his power, Naruto knew that nothing could stand in his way. The rise of Naruto Uzumaki had begun to shake the foundations of the shinobi world in ways no one could have predicted. With Konoha under his rule, the land of fire conquered, and the daimyo dethroned, the time for subtlety had passed. The other hidden villages, once divided by politics and territorial disputes, now faced the common enemy that was Naruto. What had once been whispers of resistance now turned into action, as the 5 great shinobi nations recognized the immediate threat Naruto posed to their existence. Desperation turned into action as the leaders of the 5 nations, those who had once been wary of one another, formed an unprecedented alliance. The Raikage of the Cloud, the Mizukage of the Mist, the Kazekage of the Sand, the Tsuchikage of the Stone, and the Hokage of the Leaf, along with their most powerful warriors, came together to wage war on the man who had now become a force of nature. They knew that the world could no longer tolerate the unchecked power of a single individual. If Naruto was left to continue his rampage, there would be nothing left of the old world order. This marked the beginning of the war against the 5 nations. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing battle for survival, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Naruto, however, was not concerned. He had long known that the 5 nations would eventually unite against him, and he welcomed the challenge. His ambition, once limited to Konoha and the Land of Fire, now extended to the world itself. He would be the one to decide the fate of the shinobi world, and he would leave nothing but destruction in his wake. The battlefield was set in the heart of the Land of Fire, a desolate stretch of land surrounded by towering mountains. The forces of the 5 nations gathered, their armies ready for the fight of their lives. At the forefront were the most powerful shinobi the world had ever known. The Raikage, the Mizukage, and the Kazekage, each a symbol of their village's strength and pride. These leaders, each possessing formidable power and unique abilities, had come together to take down the threat that was Naruto. But Naruto was no ordinary foe. He had long surpassed the power of the average shinobi, having mastered abilities that defied reason. His overheat strings, parasite control, and mastery of armament haki had transformed him into an unstoppable force. Now, he stood at the center of the battlefield, his eyes glowing with cold determination. The storm that was about to break would leave nothing but ruin in its wake. As the allied forces of the 5 nations advanced, Naruto raised his hand, and the air seemed to tremble. The ground beneath him cracked, and from the depths of the earth, his ultimate technique, the birdcage, began to take form. It was a devastating creation, a web of razor-sharp strings that spiraled into the sky like a monstrous cage. The strings stretched across the battlefield, their tips laced with an energy so powerful that they could slice through even the toughest defenses. The birdcage expanded rapidly, enclosing the entire battlefield, trapping the allied forces within its deadly confines. The members of the 5 nations found themselves unable to escape, their every movement restricted by the unrelenting strings that surrounded them. The battlefield became a deadly arena, and Naruto was the undisputed master of it. "Welcome to my world," Naruto's voice echoed across the battlefield, a cold, menacing tone laced with power. "You can try to escape, but there is no way out. All that awaits you is defeat." The 5 nations' forces were thrown into chaos. The Raikage, known for his lightning-fast reflexes and raw power, roared in fury as he attempted to break through the cage, but the strings held firm. The Mizukage, a master of water-based techniques, summoned a torrent of water to flood the battlefield, but even her formidable jutsu could not match the relentless power of Naruto's strings. The Kazekage, skilled in the art of wind manipulation, tried to whip up a storm to tear apart the cage, but his efforts were in vain. Naruto watched with an almost bored expression as his enemies struggled. He had anticipated their every move, and his strings responded with deadly precision. He had already begun to create hundreds of string clones, each a perfect replica of himself, each equipped with the full range of his powers. These clones, each one enhanced with the strength of his parasite control and overheat strings, moved through the battlefield with deadly intent. They attacked with ruthless efficiency, overwhelming the allied forces with a barrage of strikes that left no room for counterattack. The first to fall was the Raikage. Despite his immense strength, the Raikage was not prepared for the overwhelming power of Naruto's strings. As he charged forward, intent on breaking through the cage, Naruto's strings wrapped around his body, ensnaring him with inhuman precision. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto severed the Raikage's arm clean off. The powerful shinobi staggered back, his face contorted in pain and disbelief. But before he could react, Naruto's strings tightened around him, rendering him immobile. The Raikage was paralyzed, his body trapped by the same force that had brought him to the battlefield. "You were a fool to think you could defeat me," Naruto taunted, watching as the Raikage struggled futilely against the unyielding strings. "Strength means nothing when it's powerless against true power." Next, Naruto turned his attention to the Mizukage. The woman had always been known for her cunning and agility, and she was one of the few who had managed to pose a challenge to Naruto in the past. But now, with his parasite strings at his command, she was no match for him. As she attempted to use her water techniques to escape, Naruto's strings wrapped around her, injecting the deadly parasite control into her system. The Mizukage's body froze as the parasitic strings took hold, her limbs locking in place as she was paralyzed. She tried to fight back, but the more she struggled, the tighter Naruto's control became. Naruto grinned, savoring the moment. "You were once a threat. But now, you're just another puppet in my collection." Finally, Naruto turned to face the Kazekage, the leader of the Sand. The Kazekage had always been a man of great strength, and he had once been a formidable adversary to Naruto. But now, his abilities were no match for Naruto's overwhelming power. As the Kazekage summoned his wind-based jutsu, Naruto's string sliced through the air with deadly accuracy, cutting through the Kazekage's defenses. In a single, fluid motion, Naruto ensnared the Kazekage in a web of razor-sharp strings. The wind shinobi was helpless as the strings constricted around him, crushing his body with unrelenting force. "You should have stayed out of this," Naruto said coldly, watching as the Kazekage's body crumpled under the pressure of his strings. "You were never meant to stand against me." With the Raikage, Mizukage, and Kazekage defeated, the remaining forces of the five nations found themselves facing a desperate struggle. Naruto's string clones, each one as powerful as the original, continued their relentless assault, overwhelming even the most skilled shinobi with their precision and devastating attacks. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen warriors, and the air was thick with the stench of blood and death. But Naruto was far from finished. He knew that his enemies would never truly give up, that their pride and determination would continue to fuel their resistance. And so, he continued his assault, his power unmatched, his resolve unwavering. He would not rest until every last one of his enemies had been crushed beneath his heel. The war against the five nations had begun, and Naruto had already won. The only thing left was to watch as the world crumbled beneath his overwhelming might. Naruto Uzumaki stood at the peak of his power, a being who had transcended mortal limitations. With the five Kage, the leaders of the five great shinobi nations, broken and humiliated before him, the world trembled in fear of his next move. The once proud shinobi villages had been shattered, their defenses destroyed, their leaders crushed beneath the weight of his overwhelming strength and godlike abilities. The world had yet to witness the full extent of what Naruto had become, but now, there was no denying the truth, Naruto was a god. Having already conquered Konoha, the land of fire, and the five nations, Naruto now turned his attention to the most powerful and feared entities in the shinobi world, the Baijuyo, the tailed beasts. These mighty creatures, born from the very essence of chakra itself, had long been symbols of destruction and power. For centuries, they had been sealed within various Jinchuriki, their power harnessed for both good and evil. But now, Naruto sought to bend them to his will, to make them his instruments of destruction, so that he could reshape the world in his image. The Baijuyo were no mere beasts, they were ancient, living forces of nature, each one imbued with a vast reservoir of chakra that rivaled the most powerful shinobi. But to Naruto, they were nothing more than stepping stones in his path to absolute power. His ambition knew no bounds, and his newfound mastery of Conqueror's haki and his own unique abilities made him unstoppable. With the ability to dominate the will of others and impose his own power, the Baijuyo were little more than another obstacle to crush under his heel. Naruto's first target was the Nine Tails, Kurama, the most powerful of the Baijuyo. For years, Kurama had been the source of Naruto's pain, torment, and frustration, locked away inside him as a constant reminder of his loneliness and suffering. But now, that bond had changed. No longer was Kurama a mere source of resentment. Now, the Nine Tails was simply another tool to fuel Naruto's ascent to godhood. Kurama was no stranger to power. As the Nine Tails, it had wiped out entire villages with ease, its chakra so vast that it could rival the gods themselves. But when Naruto arrived to confront it, he was no longer the naive boy who had been its unwilling host. He was a force of nature, a being whose will could bend reality itself. He had tasted the power of the gods, and now, he was ready to claim the Baijuyo as his own. Naruto entered the land where Kurama was sealed, the vast forests and mountains surrounding the Nine Tails prison trembling under his presence. The ground shook as Naruto approached, his power so immense that the very earth beneath his feet seemed to bend to his will. As he approached the seal, his eyes glowed with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The time for subtlety had passed. Now, he was ready to claim his prize. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the air. Naruto Uzumaki. So, you have come for me, Kurama's voice rumbled, a mix of disdain and curiosity. Do you think you can control me, boy? You, who could barely hold my power before. Naruto smirked, his hand reaching out, fingers crackling with energy. I'm not the same Naruto you once knew. You're no longer my jailer. You are my weapon. The air around him crackled as Naruto summoned the full force of his strength, his chakra seeping into the earth and the atmosphere like a tangible force. His conqueror's haki, an overwhelming aura that could crush the will of any living being, flared to life. The skies themselves seemed to darken as Naruto's presence filled the space, sending a wave of fear across the land. He was no longer just a shinobi, he was a god, and the Byakuya would bow before him. Kurama's massive form materialized before him, a terrifying sight, its 9 massive tails whipping in the air, each one capable of destroying entire cities. The beast's red eyes glared down at Naruto, but this time, there was no fear. There was no terror. Only a sense of grudging respect, mixed with anger. Kurama, after all, had always been free, its power untamable, its will unyielding. But Naruto was different now. He had become something far beyond what any other shinobi could comprehend. You truly think you can control me? Kurama growled, its voice reverberating through the very air. I am the 9 Tails. I have crushed entire armies, wiped out villages with a flick of my tail. You are nothing compared to my strength. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his expression cold and unyielding. You're wrong, Kurama. I'm not trying to control you. I'm taking you as my own. You will be nothing more than an extension of my will. In an instant, Naruto's strings exploded into existence, wrapping around Kurama's enormous form with unrelenting precision. The sheer strength of Naruto's overeat strings was enough to make the earth tremble, each thread of chakra-infused string pulling at the 9 Tails' will. But this wasn't just about strength, it was about domination. Naruto's conqueror's haki surged through the strings, and in that moment, the very soul of the 9 Tails was subjected to Naruto's power. Kurama roared in defiance, its enormous body thrashing against the strings, but it was no use. Naruto's will was too powerful. Slowly but surely, the Byakuya's resistance began to falter. The great beast was being dragged into submission, its chakra bending to the force of Naruto's will. The more it fought, the more it was pulled into the web of strings, until finally, Kurama's form fell to the ground, defeated and subdued. Naruto stepped forward, his eyes burning with triumph. You're mine now. You will no longer be a source of power for anyone else. You will serve me. With a single thought, Naruto began to weave his chakra and strings into something even more horrifying, a monstrous construct born from the essence of the Byakuya themselves. His ultimate creation, a massive string beast, a creature composed of chakra, strings, and the power of the 9 Byakuya. It was a beast of destruction, capable of leveling entire countries with a mere thought. Kurama, now fully under Naruto's control, was forced to become a part of the string beast, its immense chakra merging with Naruto's creation. The massive creature writhed as it absorbed the power of the 9 Tails, becoming a living, breathing weapon of unimaginable power. Naruto stood before the beast, gazing at the creation he had forged with cold satisfaction. With this, I am unstoppable. The world will bend to my will. No one can defy me. The string beast, now a manifestation of Naruto's power, roared into the sky, its immense form shifting and rippling with the energy of the Byakuya. Its very presence warped the landscape, turning the land into a barren wasteland. It was a living nightmare, capable of destroying anything in its path. Naruto's laughter echoed across the battlefield. I am the string demon god, the ruler of all. Anyone who dares to oppose me will be destroyed. I am beyond the reach of any mere mortal. The power of the Byakuya flowed through Naruto, making him invincible. His string beast, a terrifying fusion of chakra and strings, was an unstoppable force, capable of annihilating entire villages, armies, and even the most formidable shinobi. And now, Naruto had claimed it as his own. Naruto raised his hand, and the sky itself seemed to respond. With a single command, the string beast moved forward, its immense power surging across the land like a tidal wave. The world trembled as Naruto's wrath descended upon it. "I have become a god," Naruto whispered, his voice filled with an almost divine confidence. "And the world will kneel before me." The age of the shinobi had ended. The age of the string demon god had begun. The world that had once known Naruto Uzumaki as a promising shinobi, full of potential and dreams, was now irrevocably changed. The village of Konoha, the land of fire, and all the other shinobi villages that had once stood as pillars of resistance had all fallen before the overwhelming power of the string demon god. The leaders, the cage, the Baijuyu, every challenge to Naruto's absolute reign had been destroyed. His ambition, once tempered by youthful dreams, had become a relentless force, crushing everything in its path. Now, Naruto's rule was absolute. He held dominion over every corner of the shinobi world. His strings reached far beyond Konoha, weaving through the very fabric of the land, binding every village, every faction, and every life under his iron grip. The very air seemed to tremble at his presence, and all who dared defy him were either slaughtered or bent to his will. No more resistance. No more hope. But despite his overwhelming power, there was a spark of defiance that had not been extinguished. In the shadows of his empire, a rebellion was growing. It was led by those who had once been his closest allies, Kakashi Hatake, Tsunade Senju, and Jiraiya. Once, they had been his mentors, his friends, his family. But now, they were enemies. They had seen what Naruto had become, and they could not stand by while he descended further into darkness. Konoha, once a symbol of hope and protection, now lay under a blanket of fear, its streets patrolled by Naruto's string-controlled minions. Even the great Hokage's mansion, the very heart of the village, had become nothing more than a gilded prison. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a stirring of final, desperate hope. Kakashi, Tsunade, and Jiraiya had secretly banded together, drawing up plans for one final stand. They knew the cost of their rebellion would be high, but they had no choice. The world needed to be freed from Naruto's tyrannical rule. And, perhaps, there was still a sliver of hope that the boy they had once known could be reached before it was too late. Their plan was simple: strike at the heart of Naruto's power. They would confront him in battle, force him to face the truth of his own descent into madness, and, if possible, bring him back from the precipice. But they knew the odds were slim. Naruto had grown beyond anything they had ever anticipated. The day of reckoning came swiftly. The rebellion launched its final assault, a desperate push toward the heart of Konoha, where Naruto awaited them, standing atop the Hokage monument. His figure was a dark silhouette against the blood-red sky, the setting sun casting a foreboding glow over the village. The time had come to put an end to this farce, to crush the last remnants of resistance. Kakashi, Tsunade, and Jiraiya led the charge, their forces composed of the remnants of the shinobi who had escaped Naruto's control. They fought with desperation in their eyes, their movements fueled by the memories of better days. But they were outmatched. No matter how hard they fought, no matter how many they rallied to their cause, Naruto's power was absolute. Naruto stood calmly, his eyes never leaving the advancing army. His arms were crossed, and his expression was cold, calculating. The final battle would be one-sided, and he knew it. His strength had only grown since he had first started his rise to power. Now, with the complete power of the Baijuyo, the most devastating techniques in his arsenal, and the unyielding control of his strings, there was no one left who could stand against him. As the rebellion closed in, Naruto raised his hand. The air around him crackled with power, the very ground shaking as he unleashed his ultimate technique, the spider's web. Thousands of strands of chakra-infused strings erupted from his body, spreading out in all directions. They were like the threads of a spider's web, stretching from every corner of the battlefield, weaving through the air, the ground, and the very souls of the rebellion's fighters. Those caught within the web found themselves paralyzed, unable to move, their chakra drained as the strings tightened around them. The battlefield was silent, save for the sounds of the dying and the crackling of Naruto's strings. It was a massacre. Entire armies were trapped in his web, their bodies writhing as they were shredded, turned into nothing more than puppets in Naruto's hands. His enemies were powerless against him. They could not escape. The web was inescapable. His strings were absolute. Tsunade and Jiraiya, the last of the legendary Sannin, fought valiantly, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Tsunade's raw strength and healing abilities were no match for Naruto's unrelenting strings, which pierced through her defenses and kept her at bay. Jiraiya's wisdom and experience were valuable, but they, too, fell short before the might of the string demon god. It was a battle they could not win. In the chaos, Kakashi managed to break through, finding his way to Naruto's location atop the Hokage monument. His Sharingan gleamed, and his body moved with the precision of a master shinobi. But even Kakashi, once one of the most powerful shinobi in the world, could not escape the grasp of Naruto's strings. Naruto watched him approach, his face unreadable. "So, it's you," Naruto said coldly, his voice filled with an unsettling calmness. "The last of them?" Kakashi's eyes flickered with a mix of sadness and determination. He had trained Naruto, believed in him, but this Naruto was a monster. "Naruto," Kakashi said, his voice strained, "this isn't you. You can still turn back. We're still your friends." Naruto's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed as though a flicker of recognition passed through his expression. But then, his gaze hardened. "Friends? You were never my friends. You were tools, pawns in my game. This world bends to my will now." With a single motion, Naruto extended his hand, and the strings exploded outward, wrapping around Kakashi, paralyzing him. Kakashi struggled, but the strings tightened, and he collapsed to his knees. "You were always a tool to me, Kakashi," Naruto continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just like all of you. It's over. The rebellion ends here." But Kakashi refused to give in. With a final burst of chakra, he activated his Kamui, warping himself out of Naruto's grip. He landed on his feet, blood pouring from his body as he struggled to remain standing. "This isn't over, Naruto," Kakashi said, his voice filled with the last remnants of hope. "I'll stop you. I won't let you destroy everything we fought for." Naruto smiled darkly. "You can't stop me. You never could." The battle raged on, but Naruto's victory was inevitable. Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Kakashi were all caught in his web, unable to break free. Naruto's eyes remained cold and unfeeling, his heart hardened by years of betrayal, pain, and ambition. He had no need for their weak ideals. They were nothing more than a reminder of the past, a past that was now irrelevant to his goals. But the greatest challenge remained. The final showdown. The one fight that Naruto had been preparing for all his life, against Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke had never given up on Naruto. Even after everything, Naruto's rise to power, his conquest, his destruction, Sasuke still believed in the bond they shared. He had trained in secret, honing his skills and refining his own power. He had come to stop Naruto, to bring him back from the darkness. But Sasuke, too, had changed. The years of struggle, the pursuit of revenge, the constant battle for dominance, these things had shaped him into someone different. But he would never stop believing in Naruto, even if he had to fight against him. Naruto and Sasuke stood across from each other, the final battle at hand. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Both had changed. Both had become shadows of their former selves. But the bond between them remained, even if only in the darkest corners of their hearts. Sasuke activated his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, his Susanoo forming around him in a massive, ethereal warrior. The power of the Uchiha was immense, but Naruto was beyond anything Sasuke could have imagined. The battle was fierce, with both shinobi exchanging devastating blows, their abilities clashing in a spectacle of power. Sasuke's Susanoo was a formidable defense, but it was no match for Naruto's overwhelming strength and mastery of armament haki. Naruto's strings, now enhanced by his haki, tore through Sasuke's Susanoo like paper. The ethereal warrior was shattered, and Sasuke was left exposed. In a final, crushing blow, Naruto's strings wrapped around Sasuke's body, binding him tightly. Sasuke, battered and broken, knelt before Naruto, unable to escape. The weight of Naruto's power pressed down on him, and in that moment, Sasuke realized the truth. Naruto had become something beyond human. He was a god. "You were always chasing me, Sasuke," Naruto said coldly, his voice filled with disdain. "Now kneel. I am your superior. Your efforts were meaningless." Sasuke's body trembled, but he refused to show weakness. "I won't bow to you, Naruto," he spat, but his voice lacked the strength it once had. Naruto, however, simply smiled, his eyes burning with cold fury. "It's too late for you, Sasuke. You have no place in my world anymore." And with that, Naruto sealed Sasuke's fate, his strings tightening around the Uchiha's body, breaking him completely. The rebellion was over. The world had fallen. Naruto Uzumaki was the supreme ruler, a god in the eyes of the shattered world. The fall of hope had come. The world that had once teemed with life, conflict, and hope was now a desolate wasteland under Naruto's unyielding control. The once vibrant shinobi villages, each with their own cultures, histories, and proud legacies, had been reduced to hollow shells of their former selves. There was no room for ideals of freedom or independence anymore. The age of rebellion had ended, and the era of absolute dominion had begun. The world was now a place where every living thing existed solely at the will of the string demon god, Naruto Uzumaki. In his unrelenting rise to power, Naruto had crushed all opposition, leaving no force standing to challenge his rule. The five kage once revered as the pillars of the shinobi world were nothing more than marionettes under his control, each shackled to his will by the strings that bound them, both literally and figuratively. The great shinobi villages were now under his iron grip, their leaders subjugated and rendered powerless. The very air itself seemed to resonate with the pulse of Naruto's strings, weaving through the fabric of the world with a terrifying precision, ensuring that no one would dare to rise against him again. Naruto's parasite strings, now enhanced by the power of the Baijuyu and his mastery over Conqueror's haki, had become his most potent weapon. These strings could invade the minds of his enemies, controlling them completely, forcing them to bow to his will. There was no escape from his dominance whether you were a kage, a civilian, or even a powerful warrior, no one could resist the pull of his strings. It was a world where even the greatest minds and the strongest hearts were reduced to nothing more than puppets on his stage. The surviving kage, those who had once led their villages with pride, had no choice but to submit to Naruto's control. In the aftermath of the war, Naruto had personally hunted down each of them, using his overheat strings to disable their defenses and then forcing them into a position of complete obedience. With the kage under his control, he had effectively taken the last remnants of autonomy away from the world's leaders. They were no longer the symbols of strength or justice, they were simply his tools, bound by the very strings that made them who they were. The Raikage, once a symbol of unyielding strength, had been the first to fall. His powerful physique and lightning-fast reflexes had been no match for Naruto's strengths. After an intense battle, Naruto had pierced his heart with a single thread of chakra-infused wire, paralyzing him. Then, using his parasite strings, he had completely reprogrammed the Raikage's mind, transforming him into a puppet that would only serve Naruto's whims. The Raikage now stood by his side, a hollow shell of his former self, his eyes devoid of any will of his own. He had been reduced to nothing more than a tool of the string demon god. The Mizukage, the once proud leader of the Hidden Mist, had been similarly crushed. Naruto had used his strings to invade her mind, stripping her of any semblance of resistance. She had fought valiantly, but in the end, her strength had been no match for the precision and depth of Naruto's parasite strings. She had begged for mercy, but there had been none. Naruto had manipulated her body like a puppet, forcing her to kneel before him, and then, with a cruel smile, had bound her in the strings, ensuring that she would never defy him again. The Kazekage, the leader of the Hidden Sand, had been a harder target. His mastery over sand had made him a formidable opponent, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though he might be able to escape Naruto's grasp. But Naruto had been prepared. He had used his overheat strings to burn through the sand, and with the power of his conqueror's haki, he had shattered the Kazekage's defenses. In the end, the Kazekage had been left with no choice but to submit to Naruto's control, his mind forever ensnared by the strings that bound him. The Hokage, Tsunade, had put up a desperate fight, but even she had eventually fallen. Despite her immense strength and unparalleled healing abilities, there had been no escaping the relentless advance of Naruto's strings. Tsunade had tried to fight back, using her immense chakra and physical prowess to break free, but Naruto's strings had wrapped around her, tightening with every move she made. With a single word, Naruto had reduced her to a puppet. Her once fiery spirit had been crushed under the weight of his power, and she now stood as another casualty of Naruto's reign. And finally, the last of the cage had been broken, the Tsuchikage. The master of earth and stone had been a difficult opponent, but Naruto had outsmarted him at every turn. His mastery over his strings had allowed him to manipulate the very earth itself, and with a flick of his wrist, the Tsuchikage had been brought to his knees, unable to do anything but submit to Naruto's will. Like the others, he now served Naruto, bound by the invisible strings that controlled him. With the cage subdued, Naruto's power over the villages was complete. The once proud nations of the shinobi world were now little more than puppet states, their leaders nothing more than hollow figures controlled by Naruto's strings. But the true horror of his rule lay not in the subjugation of the cage, but in the way he reshaped the entire world in his twisted image. Under Naruto's reign, the world had become a place where fear ruled every corner. The villages, once centers of culture and strength, were now little more than prisons, each one a reflection of Naruto's unyielding control. The streets of Konoha were filled with despair, its once vibrant marketplaces now silent and empty. The villagers went about their daily lives, their faces blank and hollow, knowing that they were nothing more than pawns in a world where Naruto's will was absolute. Naruto had reshaped the entire structure of the shinobi world. The once proud shinobi ranks had been restructured, with only those who had sworn absolute loyalty to Naruto allowed to retain any semblance of power. The ranks of the elite, those who had once been the proud warriors of the shinobi world, were now filled with puppet soldiers controlled by Naruto's strings. His elite force of string puppets, once led by his closest allies, now included every powerful shinobi who had been forced to bend to his will. They were his eyes and ears, his enforcers, and his instruments of terror. No one dared defy Naruto, for to do so meant death or worse, becoming a puppet in his ever-expanding web of control. But the greatest horror of all lay in the way Naruto had transformed the very concept of freedom. No longer did the people of the shinobi world have any sense of autonomy. Every village, every city, every corner of the land had been absorbed into Naruto's vast, unyielding network of control. Those who lived outside the boundaries of the villages were now slaves to his will, their lives dictated by the power of his strings. Naruto had also enacted a brutal system of punishment for those who dared resist him. The slightest infraction, the smallest act of rebellion, was met with swift and merciless punishment. Rebels were hunted down and either destroyed or turned into mindless puppets, forced to serve him for all eternity. The slightest hint of defiance was met with a brutal reminder of the consequences. Those who rebelled were never seen again, their bodies left to rot as a warning to others. In the midst of this bleak, oppressive world, Naruto ruled as a god. His strings held the very fabric of the world together, and with a flick of his wrist, he could destroy everything. The world had become a dystopian nightmare, a place where hope no longer existed. And as Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument, his eyes surveying the world below, he could not help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had achieved what no one had ever thought possible. He had bent the world to his will. He was the string demon god, the ruler of the shinobi world, and there was no one left to challenge him. The age of the shinobi was over, and in its place, a new world had been born, a world of strings, bound by the will of one man. For Naruto, there was no longer any need for redemption. There was no longer any need for the past. He had created his own world, his own destiny, and nothing could stand in his way. A world in strings. A world where he was the only force that mattered.